services. If I click on the plus sign, the second option from the top says service flow. Okay, so I'll click on this, and here I have to provide the name for the service flow, and the name say is type ahead Ajax service. Okay, so whenever you're naming an Ajax service, so either you can put some space if the name is big, or you can also provide the name without a space as well. Okay, there is no hard and fast that you have to put spaces in between if the name is big. You can also put the name without any space, not an issue. Okay, so I provided some space, and this is the name. I click on finish, and now this creates the service flow, and this is how it looks like. Okay, so this is how your service flow looks like. And like I said very at the very first day of our lab sessions, that whatever artifact you create in IBM BPM, whether it's a process or a human service or any kind of service, you will always see start event and end event will always be there. Start event is always used to trigger an artifact, and end event whenever it reaches the end event, which means that artifact which was at the triggered state, it will now be completed. Be it a process, be it a human service, be it any kind of service. All right. So this is the service flow. Now the first thing which we will see, how I can convert a service flow into an Ajax service, how I can convert it into an integration service or a GSS. Okay, let's see that configuration. To see that configuration, where do I need to go? Here I have some overview option, right? At the top, overview, diagram and variables. I will go to overview. Now in this overview, we can see properties are there. Common property, Ajax access, and additional properties. Common property is something which you will see for every artifact. It shows you the name of the artifact and some documentation which you can add. Now coming to the right hand side, Ajax access. Okay. Now in this Ajax access, guys, we see here three options. What it says, specify what access level is required to call this service flow. First option says do not allow Ajax calls. If you select this option, then this service automatically gets configured as an integration service or a GSS, because it says do not allow Ajax calls. So an Ajax service, definitely it will have Ajax calls. So if it's a non-Ajax service, then definitely it will not have any, or it will not make any Ajax call, right? So if I have to create an integration service through web designer, I have to create a service flow, and then I have to select the first option which says do not allow Ajax calls. Coming to the second option, allow calls from trusted callers. If I create an Ajax service, and this Ajax service, it tries to communicate with some external application. Okay, if I want to create an Ajax service which tries to interact with an external application, then in that case, I have to set allow calls from trusted callers. I'll give an example. I create an Ajax service that interacts with the database. Database is an external application, right? So in that case, I have to select the second option, allow calls from trusted callers. Third option, allow calls from all users. If I want to create an Ajax service, but that would populate the details internally within BPM, it will get the data internally within BPM and it will populate in the coach. In that scenario, I have to use allow call from all users. I'm not making any external call to get the data through this Ajax service. That's the reason I have selected allow calls from all users. So I repeat, if I create an Ajax service which tries to interact with some external application, then I have to select the second option. If I want to create an Ajax service which will not interact with some external application, but will dynamically populate the data within BPM, then I have to select the third option. Allow calls from all users. Are we good? Any
Rahul,
questions?
Yes, Rahul.
Yes.
do we need to define the trusted ones?
No, no need.
Okay.
We don't have to define.
Okay, so how does the software know that if a caller is trusted or not?
So whenever you select the second option, say today I select the second option, and if I try to make any internal call, it will not work. So it has some internal algorithm through which it actually checks whether I'm making an external call or whether I'm making an internal call to BPM.
Mhm.
So accordingly, it identifies. There is no way we can configure this. So there is
Okay.
some algorithm within the BPM which actually understands that whether we are making an external call or whether we are making some internal call. And
Okay.
definitely for making an external call through an Ajax service, I need to add some artifacts which is used to make an external call. So by that also BPM can identify that this is a call which will make external call and this is a trusted call.
Okay, Rahul.
So here trusted callers, you can understand by the term trusted callers, which means I am making some external call and this call is definitely a trusted call, which means I am creating an artifact in BPM and this BPM artifact is interacting with some external application. So if I'm a developer, I definitely have idea that if I want to interact with a external application, then this Ajax service will definitely allow the call to happen. And whenever that call happens, whatever operation I want to perform, that operation will also be performed. So in that scenario, also the BPM understand that okay, this is a trusted call, so we should allow it. Okay, so some internal algorithm will definitely be there. Okay, all right. So this is
Rahul, I
yes.
have one doubt. In
Yeah.
both, the Ajax doesn't like
Hmm.
directly interacts to the database and collects it to the coach, right? Without the users. In the both, like allow calls from trusted
Hmm.
callers also, it interact with the database and connects with
No,
the coach.
no. So if you select the third option,
Mm-hmm.
it will not interact with the database. It will not
Only
interact
the coach.
with any external application. It is only for
Okay,
the coach. Okay.
okay.
So
Only the user
I
interface.
correct only user
Uh,
interface. So I gave an example of lazy loading that can be
mm-hmm.
implemented with the help of this third option. I gave an example of type ahead, which we are going to see.
Mm-hmm.
This all can be implemented using the third option.
Okay.
Rahul, can you
Rahul.
explain do not allow Ajax call?
Yes. So once again, I'll repeat. So if I create a service flow and I select the first option, do not allow Ajax calls, which means I am actually trying to configure this service flow as an integration service or a general system service. So whenever I select the first option, this service flow will not work as an Ajax service, but rather it will be used to maybe integrate some external application to get some data, but will not work like an Ajax service. It will work as a simple integration service. I'll give an example of a simple integration service or a simple service flow without any Ajax call. Before the coach, we are designing some human service, and before the coach, I create a service flow, and that service flow, what it will do, it will interact with the database, and it will get me the employee ID of the employee. Okay, so this we can do only if I am creating a service flow and I'm using it as an integration service. This cannot be implemented using an Ajax service. It can only be implemented using an integration service. So in this kind of scenario, I always need to select the first option. I'll give one more example. After the employee has submitted the leave application, I insert all the data, whatever the employee has submitted into the database. This also needs to be done using an integration service and not an Ajax service. Okay, so for this kind of implementations, we have to select the first option, which says do not allow Ajax calls. Okay,
Got it.
are we good? Yeah.
Got it.
Okay. All right. Now we come to the second property called additional properties. And over here, the first option that we see, enable caching of service result. Let's discuss about this also. Now you will see in many interviews also this question will come, that how can we cache a BPM service? How service caching is done in BPM, or where can we do the service caching? First of all, this service caching, whatever mechanism it is, we will definitely discuss now. But this mechanism, it was available. If you see it even today, if you're using desktop designer, you will see that this caching mechanism can be done, or we could have done only on an Ajax service. If I create an integration service from the desktop designer, even today, this caching property is not there. This caching mechanism cannot be applied to an integration service. But now, since we have a service flow, since a lot of things have been upgraded, now caching technique can also be applied to an integration service also. Like we can apply for an Ajax service, we can also apply it for an integration service also. Now, what is this caching of result? What is this caching of service result? Say, just simple example which I was giving in the morning, right? Say we have a coach, and before the coach, we have implemented some service flow, and that service flow will interact with the database and will get all the details from the DB, and the same result I am going to populate on the coach. Whatever coach views I'm using in the coach, I'm going to populate the same result on the coach, right? Now just think, this call is expensive, right? Which I was talking about in the morning, that every time whenever this human service will be triggered, first interaction will happen with the DB. It will get all the details. It will then populate all the details to the coach views, and then the coach will load, right? So it's a difficult thing. It's an overhead. The performance will go down because every time the coach will take some time to load, right? First will get the details from the DB and then it will populate. So the coach will take around say 2 seconds or 3 seconds to load. So to avoid this thing, this caching has been introduced. What is this caching? First of all, whenever you install IBM BPM, okay, we get some cache memory. Some cache memory is allocated. Remember in our process admin session, we were seeing the different types of cache over there, right? So those caches can be controlled by the admin team. Now there is also some cache which is allocated for the BPM artifacts, right? Now what happens if I enable this option? Whenever I enable this option, it gives me a timer over here, which I can set. You can see it is in the form of days, hours, minutes, and seconds, right? So I provide any time over here. Now what happens if I provide some time? Say right now 12 hours is selected. Say we have created a service flow which will interact with the database to get some result, and that result I'm going to use to display in my coach, right? This is the implementation which we are talking about. Now, first time in the day, whenever this Ajax service will be triggered, it will first interact with the database. It will get all the details from the DB, and it will store the result in cache memory. Okay. Now for the next 12 hours, whenever this Ajax service will be called, it will now not interact with the DB. Instead, it will get the result from the cache memory and populate it to my coach. Now this enhances the performance of my BPM application. Now the coach does not take so much of time to load. Why? Because now I'm not making any external call. I am making an internal call within BPM and getting all the result from the cache memory. What happens after 12 hours? Cache memory is now deleted, whatever memory it was holding for those data. Now all those data will be removed, will be deleted automatically. And again after 12 hours, Again, a call will be made to the database to get the result. Again, the same result will be stored in the cache memory. And again, for the next 12 hours, it will not interact with the DB, but it will again interact with the cache memory, get the result, and use the result to display in some coach. Right? We are good with this example with caching. What do we mean by caching of service result?
Yes, Rahul.
Okay. Similarly, we can also do this in case of an Ajax service also. So if I am using some Ajax service, if I want to implement an Ajax service which will interact with some database, there also I can enable the caching. Okay, because you can implement an Ajax service which will interact with the DB that we done. So in that scenario also, you can enable the caching and you can set some time. Now, definitely, guys, this time needs to be discussed with the database team, because if we are pulling up some master data from the table, I should know that what is the interval, what is the average interval of time when the master data gets updated. Say today morning, I got the data from the DB and I stored that in the cache memory because I've enabled this cache, right? I've enabled this caching mechanism over here. Now, say after 2 hours, the master table got updated with some new data, right? So what will happen? For the next 12 hours, you are actually using some old data of the table, right? So before enabling the cache, we should first discuss with the database team that for how long we can use this caching technique, because they will have some idea that in what interval the master data gets updated in the master table, right? So before enabling cache, if you're using some database implementation, so before enabling the cache, you have to check with the database team and then only you can set the timer over here, right? So this is about the caching of service result. Shared business of we'll discuss later. We haven't
Rahul,
covered. Yes.
so you said it
Hmm.
catches the results, right? So what happens if I change some logic inside the service? For example, inside script, I had changed the logic, but inputs remain the same. So will it still fetch the data from the cache and show me, or it will execute the service?
There is no relation with changing the input and output.
Mhm.
So relation as in when I'm fetching the data from the DB. So if that remains the same, whether I'm changing the input doesn't really matter, right? So we're talking about, say I'm changing the query. Say there was some query before. Now I'm changing the query. Say I'm adding some where clause now.
Okay.
Initially the query was select star or select employee details or employee ID, employee name, employee address from employee table. Now say
Okay.
I change the query. Say I add a
Mhm.
where clause. I add some more filter in the query. Now accordingly the query will work. It will still store the data in the cache memory. There is no impact. Here
Mhm.
cache memory is just to store the result. Whether you are changing the signature of the service doesn't really matter. Okay.
So
I'm
how
just
will it
storing the result.
correlate, Rahul? How will it correlate which result it should fetch? So irrespective of any logic, it will fetch the
Hmm.
data from the cache and show me, or how is it?
Whenever you are changing the implementation, say I am changing the implementation of this Ajax service completely.
Okay.
Initially I was calling the employee to get the data. Now I'm calling some other table. Now I'm changing the logic.
Okay.
In that scenario, I have to disable this and then I have to enable once again. Okay. So this what this would do, whatever cache memory was being stored before, I am actually removing that. And after we deploy this to some environment, accordingly again, whenever you deploy the new change, accordingly again it will go to the database, it will store the new data now in the cache memory. The old data will be overwritten. That is what happens if you enable caching and you change the implementation.
Got it,
So,
Rahul.
so this is a very common thing. I mean, this is a common scenario which Kirtana actually said, and that's a very correct scenario. Say I have an Ajax service already which is interacting with the DB, and I've already enabled the cache, right? Now tomorrow I am doing some more changes on the Ajax service. Now guys, when I did the first change, the Ajax service has already been deployed to QA environment. It is already interacting with the DB. It has stored all the result in the cache memory. Now tomorrow my lead comes and tells me that whatever Ajax service you have developed, you need to change that. I can see that the query which you have that is not correct. You need to redefine your query once again. So I change the query once again. The cache is still enabled over here, right? I'm in the development environment. Now I deploy this, I take a snapshot and I deploy the same Ajax again in QA. So obviously my old data, whatever was there in the cache memory, that will now be removed because I'm doing a new deployment, right? So the old cache will now be removed since I have deployed my new Ajax service with new implementation, and since I have enabled this again, what will happen? The old data, whatever was there in the cache, that is now removed, and the new interaction with this Ajax service that is doing with the database, it will now get all the details and will store in the same cache memory. Now that result will be used going ahead for the next 12 hours. Okay, that's how my Ajax service will work. All right, so I believe we are good. If you have any questions, you can ask till whatever we have discussed till now. Okay, we are good. All right. So shared business object. We haven't discussed about it, right? So we'll be discussing on this. So I'll make sure we discuss about this by tomorrow. Okay, what is a shared business object? So these are the different features that we have for the Ajax service. Now today, the implementation that we are going to do, right? Which option should we use, guys? Among these Ajax access options, which one should we use? We are implementing
From
a
all
type ahead.
users.
Yes. So we have to use the third option called allow calls from all users. Okay. So let me save the change. And after that, I'll go to the diagram, and over here, I need to add some implementation, right? Okay. Now, before I move ahead with the implementation, I actually did some mistake. Okay. So first, I will create the human service. So in this human service, I am actually going to implement the type ahead. Okay. So just see how I am creating the Ajax service again. Okay. Whatever Ajax service I created, actually I cannot use this. Why I cannot use this, I'll tell you. So first I'll give a name for this client human service. Say populate list of countries. That's the name I give. I enable this option intended for use on multiple devices and I click on finish. Okay. Whatever we have discussed till now regarding the Ajax service, kindly remember those things, whatever configuration we discussed, what is caching technique, what is all these things. The same thing we're going to implement now again. Okay. Why we cannot use that Ajax service which I created, I'll discuss on that. So here is the coach. By default, the coach has been added. Now I'll go to the coach and now I'll show you. Okay, we'll start with the default coach. And now I'll show you the coach view, which we have to implement for this typehead implementation. Okay. So in the BPM UI toolkit, we have a coach view called typeahead. Initially, guys, whatever toolkits we used to use before, responsive coaches, all those different toolkits, they never had any typeahead implementation. There was still a way to implement a typeahead. We'll discuss on that if we have some time later. So we still can implement a typeahead even without a typeahead coach view before. How we used to implement, we'll discuss on that later. But now it has become very simple. Type ahead coach view, they're already providing us. So we can simply come on the right hand side palette to search for the coach view. I'm going to type here type. So this is, you can see type ahead text has come. I will just drag it over here. Okay. Now type ahead. I'll just change the label and I'll change it to populate or simply country. Okay. So this is the label that I have added. Now, before I do some binding and all those things, I will go to variables and here I'm going to create a private variable. Why? It doesn't need any input or output because I'm not implementing this human service in any process. It is a standalone human service which I am creating just for POC purpose. Okay. Going ahead, guys, you need to implement the same type ahead, whatever I'm showing you on the type of leave which we have implemented. Okay. So please watch the session carefully. It's a very simple implementation. Whatever drop down we have implemented for the type of leave, that needs to be replaced with this type ahead. Okay. So you need guys need to do the simple exercise whenever you get the recordings and everything. Okay. So here I'll give a name, say data input. Okay. And what is this variable? This variable I'm going to use as a binding for the type ahead text box. Okay. Which means whatever the user, whatever he's adding, right? Whatever he's typing there, say IN, that IN goes as an input to the Ajax service. And from that Ajax service, it will populate only those specific result in the type ahead. Okay. So this data input will actually, it will hold that value which the end user is entering in that type ahead text box. And whenever he's selecting India from that list of type ahead, then that India will also be stored finally in the same variable. Okay. So I'll go to the coach. Here is the type ahead coach view. And here I have the binding. I will just bind the variable over here. Right? So this is the first thing that you guys need to do whenever you implement the type ahead. Now comes step number 2. Step number 2, guys, is very similar to what we have seen in case of a drop down, right? What we did for a drop down, we went to the configuration property, and in this configuration property, we had the similar option over there also, if you remember, items. And there also we had something called item lookup mode. Here also we have something called item lookup mode. Okay, so property is very similar, but yes, the drop downs will be a bit different, and they will have a different implementation or different logic than what we did for a drop down, right? So here the first one which we see for the item lookup mode is start empty. So start empty is by default always added. It's a dummy option. So we cannot populate anything if this is set as start empty. So I have to go for the other options over here. What are those options? Items from service. Items from service is when I want to implement type ahead using some service. Exactly what we are going to do right now. Okay. So I'm going to create the type ahead service over here, and that I have to map it over here. The same service which I was trying to create. But yes, I cannot create it. I cannot use this due to some limitations. I'm going to discuss about the limitations now later. Okay. Now, what is the third option? Third option is items from list. Items from list is very similar, guys, to what we have seen for a drop down. Items from static list. Remember what we did over there? Before the coach, we added a script and we populated the type of leave over there, right?
Yes, sir.
Similar thing, yeah. So similar thing, guys, we can also do it for a type aid as well. Instead of using an Ajax service, instead of using any other service, I can also populate some static list in a script, and that I can use in the type aid. Yes, maybe I have to add more logic. Maybe some more logic is required for that, not just populating the list. But yes, that option is also there. Like if you want to populate say 4 to 5 items for a type ahead list, then that you can do it using some static list by adding a script, a client side script before the coach, and there you can populate the result which you want to display in the type ahead. But ideally, in any BPM project, whether you are using a static list or whether you are making a database call to get the details for the Ajax service, always we actually go for the second option, items from service. Okay. And whenever you select items from service, this option gets enabled, type add items service. And here we can map our own service, which we have to create now. Now the question is, what is this default type add item service, which is already mapped from before? Now, guys, yes, it is true that it is a dummy service, but it is also true that the signature of the service, whatever is there for this default type add item service, this should match with the same Ajax service which we are going to create now. The service which I created, it does not have the same signature. What is a signature? Rahul is talking about signature from last few minutes. So you see, this is a dummy service which I have opened, right? If I go to variables, here it has a specific input and it has a specific output, right? It's a dummy service. And I have come to the variables option for this dummy service. Here we have an input called data, which is of type string. And here we have an output called results, which is a list of string. This thing is called a signature. Okay. Your signature of your service, your signature can be there for your process. Signature is there for all the services. Signature is nothing but the variables that you have created in your service. Now this service, it has a specific signature, guys. It has an input called data, which is of type string. It has an output called results, which is a list of string. Apart from this, we don't see any other variables over here. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, we have to create an Ajax service for the type head using the same signature. We cannot modify the signature of the new Ajax service, which we are going to create and map on the same place where this dummy service is mapped right now. I can map it and the service will only work only if it has the same signature like this. Right? Now, what happens if I change the signature and how the signature can be changed? So here, say if I have data, which is of type string. Now, if I create my own service and say I change the name to data input, your service will work. Okay. In this output, we have results, which is a list of string. If I make it result and remove this s while creating this same variable in my service, Ajax service, unfortunately, guys, the service will not work. In IBM BPM, whenever you are going to create an artifact, okay, for any coach view, especially drop downs, especially tables, then you have type aheads. If you see, there is some kind of dummy service which is already attached over there in the configuration. Always remember, you have to follow the same signature like that service for your own service which we are going to create. Okay, without using the same signature, we cannot use our service over there. That is the same reason why I'm not going to use this typehead Ajax service, and I'm going to create again a new typehead Ajax service from a different place. Okay, so always remember that this signature needs to be there. Now the question is, can we add parameters? Yes, you can add as many parameters you can, but always remember the input name should be same. It should be of type string. It should not be of type of any other data type. It cannot be integer. It cannot be boolean. It cannot be a business object, but it has to be a string and the name has to be data. It cannot be anything else. Output, it should always be results and it should always be list of string. It should not be list of name value pair. It should not be a list of integer. It should not be a list of any other things. Yes, the question is, can I add more input? I can always add more input. Can I add more output? I can always add more output. I can add a private variable also. I can add expose process variables also. This will not impact this service, but only if I change the signature, if I change the names, if I don't add these variables in my service will not work. Okay, that's the reason they provide you always with a dummy service, which you have to refer while creating your own service in Designer. Okay, now I'll go back where we were. So we were in this option item lookup mode where I have selected items from service. Now, instead of going on the left hand side and creating a service flow from here, the best way is, that is the reason why I was not using that service, because I wanted to show you this option. Instead of creating a service flow now from there, which we have already seen from before, we should create from here. Okay, what is the advantage of creating the service from here? Whenever I create the service from this option called new, it will automatically inherit the signature of this dummy service. Okay, let's see. So I'm going to create, I'm going to click on new. I'm going to give a name, type ahead, country, Ajax. Okay, I click on finish. And now guys, if I go to variables, automatically I have the same signature which we are having in the dummy service. Okay, even you can go and create that. I could have still gone and created these variables on my own, but I wanted to show you from here so that going ahead, if you have to create an Ajax service for a typed or for a drop down, then I can always refer to this option as well from where I'm creating this Ajax service. I'll go to the overview. I'll see if properly everything is selected. So I'm going to click on this allow calls from all users. I'll go to the diagram now. I'll save my changes. And here I'm going to add some script so that I can write some code. Okay. So I'm going to write some code where I'm going to populate a result set of say 10 countries. And using that result set, I'm going to populate only a specific country in my type ahead. Okay. So let's see how to do it. On the right hand side palette, guys, we have the different components. So the first component says activity. It's a drop down. The second option says server script. I'm going to drag it over here. So server script is available. Where is available? I said on the very first day when we're discussing about the different types of activities in a process. So server script is available only in the process layer and in the service flow. We don't see a server script in a client side human service. We have seen for a client side human service, what do we use? Which type of script we use?
Script.
Client side server script.
Client side script, not client side server script.
Client
Okay.
side server script.
No, not client side server script. It is
Client
client side
side.
script. Yeah. One is client side script and the other is server script. Okay. There is nothing called client side server script. Okay. So here we'll just change the name to populate country list. Okay. And now if I want to add some code, guys, over here in this, so I have to select this script and I have to come to this option, come to this property of the script called script. You see this property script. So here you can write your own code. Okay. So your BPM code you can write. If you are good in JavaScript, you can also write. But yes, first preference always goes for BPM code, Teamworks coding, right? And then if you want to add some JavaScript, you can definitely add. So you see here, guys, script, we have two options, script and scriptlet. Okay. In a script, I can write the BPM code, whatever we have learned till now, and we can also write some JavaScript. Now, if I select scriptlet, what things we can write over here? We can write a query. I can write simple query over here, like select star from employee table or insert into table values, right? Or some update query I can write. Any kind of query I can write over here. Number one. Number two, I can write some HTML, CSS code over here. I can also do that. Okay. If you need to implement some HTML, CSS in your for your coach, you can actually create an Ajax service and you can select a scriptlet, and over here you can actually write some coding for HTML, CSS. Totally depends on the requirement. Although we don't go for HTML, CSS coding these days because we already have the BPM UI toolkit in place. But still, if you want to add some HTML, CSS, you have some UI developer in the team, then definitely you can utilize the scriptlet and you can write some HTML and CSS over here. Also, JavaScript also can be written over here. It is also supported over here. Okay. So script and scriptlet. Scriptlet we'll see. We have a session on database. That time I'll show you how a scriptlet can be used. okay, while implementing a database service like an integration service. So over there also we have the option of scripted. So wherever you are adding a server script, guys, okay, wherever you're adding a server script in a web designer, whether it's a process, I believe process does not have the option of scriptlet. I have to go back and check that. But definitely, whether you're creating any service flow, and if you're trying to add some server script over there, you can definitely use script, and you can also use scriptlet. Okay, both the options are there. Okay, I'll things will not I will not digest those things if I don't see whether we can add the scriptlet over here or not. Let me just see it quickly. So script, no. So we cannot add a scriptlet in the process layer. We have only script option. Obviously, it has some meaning because I do not want to add an HTML CSS on the process layer, right? We always do it in the service. That's the reason why scriptlet is not there. So we can simply add BPM code in the process layer using a server script. Okay, so I'll save this one. I'll go back to our type ahead Ajax service. Okay, now here, guys, the syntax is a bit different, right? We discussed on the very first day when we were implementing the client-side human service, right? So the syntax for a client-side script is different. Syntax for the server script is different. Now the good thing is client-side script, whatever syntax client-side scripting follows, server-side scripting can also use the same syntax. It can also follow the same syntax as the client-side service, as the client-side script. It will not throw any error. It will not throw any warning. Okay, it will still work. But yes, in a client-side script, we cannot implement the syntax of a server script. That also we discussed, right? So for this scenario, I am going to use the logic, or I'm going to use the syntax for a server script so that you guys can practice this also. Okay. So what I will do, I'm going to populate this result set. Okay. This list of string we are going to populate over here. tw.local dot results is equal to, can someone say me server script how I can initialize a list of string?
Flower brackets.
Using a new object.
Correct. So the one who said with the new object, that is correct, because that is how we initialize a list of string or a list in a server script. The first answer which someone gave, like using curly braces, right? That is also correct. We can also use it, but yes, that can also be used in a client-side script also, right? So we are seeing the server-side script syntax right now. So we'll use new operator. What is the next thing which we have to write, guys? Suleiman Danish,
Yes, Rahul.
the most interactive person in this entire group.
Yes.
Yes. Tell me what to write over here. Anybody can try, guys, but at least try. Give wrong answers, no issues.
Can we use flower brackets, yes, Rahul?
Close brackets here.
Flower brackets.
Business object.
No.
TW.
Yes, TW, right? That is correct. So after TW,
data.
what is the next thing?
Dot local.
Dot local. I am initializing a list of object. On the right hand side, do you really think that we should add local? What is local? Local is a variable that I create, a developer creates, right? Results, it is a list of string. So what is string, guys?
Variable type.
A set of characters.
It's an object, guys. String is considered as an object, right?
Okay,
We
so to
discussed
get
this. Yeah, so this will be
okay,
TW
okay,
dot
yes,
object,
object. Okay.
right? After
TW
this, what should I add?
result dot
Dot data.
Dot
result
result. Okay, what we are initializing? What is results? It is a list of string, right?
Hmm.
So what should be
Mhm.
the next term? What should be the next thing over here? What should I add? Guys, everybody needs to participate. I see only few people. I can even name them who interacts every day. I want answers from everyone because around 25, 26 people are over here.
List.
Correct. It's list. List of. Okay. And what is after list of?
Country.
No, not country. Yes,
Strings.
somebody said something.
Strings.
String. Correct. Correct. That is string. So we are initializing, guys, results. What is results? Results is a list of string, right? That's how we initialize it. Okay. New operator, because we are instantiating a new object. We are instantiating some object, list of object, right? Then we are using TW, then object, because it's an object, and it's a list of string. So we have added list of string. If it was a list of integer, then it would have been list of integer. Okay.
So, Rahul, the list of string is predefined method, right? Okay,
Yes.
okay.
List of string is predefined. That's the reason I got this over here. I got suggestions over here, right? Okay. All right. So now we are going to populate these results. Okay. Now we know this thing, how to initialize. So I'm not explaining. So I'll just populate some countries. Let me just copy this.
Rahul, I have a doubt.
Mhm.
Do we have any syntax for automatically add all these countries, because a list of countries is a common thing, right?
To be very honest, if I'm implementing a typehead for list of countries, we are never going to populate the list of countries over here. This is just a POC so that you guys can understand. We should always interact with the DB to get the result set, and then we have to display in the type ahead. When we will have the database session, that time I'll show you. But for the time being, since this is the best example to give because there are a lot of matching characters, right, in between different countries.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that
yeah.
that would help you guys to understand how the type ahead works.
Okay,
Okay.
Rahul.
But definitely see that example also. Okay. How we can get it from the database and how we can display it. 10 minutes. Okay. So I'm purposely adding those strings, those countries which matches. So what else we can have. Okay, so we will add only these countries, around countries I've added. And now say this I'm implementing in the type ahead right now. So how this type ahead implementation will work? Okay, let me first explain you. Then we will see by running the human service how it is working. Okay. Now, initially, guys, when we had to implement type ahead, when this type ahead code view was not there, there was there was one code view for the drop down inside a toolkit called coaches. It's a very old toolkit. We do not use that toolkit anymore. So over there we had a drop down. We had a drop down code view called single select, like we have even today. Now that drop down we could have converted it into a type ahead at that time. Okay, and if I had to implement an Ajax service for drop down, then I had to write a lot of code over here. Whenever some input is coming, I had to match it with any of those. I had to add some for loop. I had to iterate and I had to find out whether anything is matching or not. Then I had to display it in the type ahead. Okay, it was an overhead for the developer. But since the time this type ahead code view was introduced in the BPM UI toolkit, the implementation has become much more simpler. Okay, how simple it is, I'll explain. This Ajax service has now been implemented or has now been mapped in that human service, right? Where we have that coach view. Now, whenever an end user is entering something over there, right? Say that person entered UN. Now, what will happen? The input will come over here from this data. And from where the input will come, you remember we created some human service, right? And here we had some private variable data input that we had mapped where that we had mapped over here, right? Now this variable will take the input and will go inside the Ajax. It will search in that result set which we have populated. Wherever it finds some match, it will get that result out of say 8 countries. It will pick up only 2 countries or 3 countries, and it will show me in the type ahead. And whenever the end user selects the country from that list, that value will be stored again in this data input. Okay, this is how the entire implementation will work. Okay, now the question is, yes, you see, since I created this from this option called new, automatically this service has been mapped over here. Okay, so always preferably guys, whenever you're creating some Ajax service for a type ahead and for drop down, always try to create the service from here so that the signature, whatever I'm adding, right, whatever is there in this dummy service, that gets added automatically over here. Because we have found that many developers, what they do not copy the same name, they try to add their own name, right? And that's how where the Ajax service will fail. So always use this new option to create the Ajax service for a type ahead implementation or for a drop down implementation. Even in a drop down also, I can implement a type ahead. How? Sorry, I can implement an Ajax service. How? The drop down will not populate the list from before. Whenever you click on the drop down, only that time it will get the result from the Ajax service and it will populate that. Okay, that's another way of implementing Ajax service for a drop down. Okay, we are seeing type ahead, and type ahead implementation is the same way which we have seen right now. Now, yes, when a type ahead is there, right? When a type ahead is added in a web page or in a coach, now I also need to educate the user. The user will get confused. Like it's telling select countries and there is a text box. There is no drop down. He will be confused, right? So what I can do, I can add some placeholder text so that the user can understand what he needs to do over there, right? So you see there is something called behavior property and we have something called placeholder text. So here I will just type, please type your country. Okay, now what happens? Let's see. We'll run this now. We'll run the human service. We have this type, we have this country type ahead, and we see it says, please type your country. Now I'm going to type country, India. Okay, so now I can see out of 8 countries, I can now see only 2 countries over here, right? Similarly, if I type say UN, I will be able to see only those countries which has UN inside that string. So just think, we are just using 8 countries, right? Now, out of 191 countries, if you select UN, you get only say 5 to 7 countries from that list. So isn't it good?